Hi, Noel T. Manning II here, and welcome to Meet Me at the Movies Open Dialogue, where we spend time with filmmakers getting to learn about their craft, their art, and why they do what they do. So happy today to have the writers and directors for Antebellum with us, Gerard Bush and also Christopher Renz. We appreciate you guys so much for being here today.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thank you for having us.
I'm going to say this before we get started. When I look back at films of 2020, recently had some dialogue with one of my film journalist friends, several of them. And one of them, I'm going to go ahead and give his name, Daryl Manzel, had Antebellum as the best cinematography of the year. So Daryl, I want to go ahead and give him a shout out because he was high on praise for Antebellum. So I wanted to make sure we mention that. And we'll talk cinematography and a few other things as well. I'd love to hear about your collaborative process in developing and fulfilling stories, because there's one thing to be able to develop an idea, but then to execute it and see it come out the other end is something completely different. So I'd love to hear about the collaboration between you two and what that process is like.
Well, first of all, we've been together for 12 years, and when we first got together, it was like the third or fourth day we had an idea about aliens that we wanted to write, and we went back to my place and started writing it, and we were really excited about it, living in Miami, Florida. But we looked at each other. This was right in the middle of a great economic implosion. And everything was really going pear-shaped, and we were at ground zero in Miami with real estate. So he said, look, we're not about to pack up all of our stuff and move to Los Angeles on a wing and a prayer.
Right.
We need to hone our skills together and individually to figure out who we are as storytellers individually, so then we can come together. And that's when we started our shop, Bush and Renz. And over the next 10 years, we really developed a visual identity and language, a way of writing together that toward the end of that, it became almost telepathic.
Yeah.
So the collaborative process for us really boils down to a really simple tenet, which is to say, we defer to the person who feels the most passionate about a thing that we are debating, or an issue that we're debating. Now, look, on the rare occasion, we can both get deeply entrenched in our point of view is the right way to go, but we always find a way through.
Christopher, you want to add anything to that, or is that right on target there?
No, I would just say that it's a good thing that we write and direct, because most of those, all of those conversations or disagreements that we may have on certain things happen in the privacy of our own home, so that by the time we go and we're on set directing, we know exactly what we want.
When you look at Antebellum, I think it's one of those films to me that I see as this intersection of art, entertainment, and also commentary. And that is a truly difficult thing to execute and execute well. And to see you doing this for this feature film debut is pretty astounding. How were you able to get to that point to be able to find a way to bring those together?
Well, first of all, we had a lot of support. I mean, we had people that had been making films for a long time in our department heads. So we were really lucky to have Gary Marcus, who was a brilliant AD. We had Jeremy Woodward, who is, I think Chris and I are just super fans of him as a production designer. Mary Zofries. Lorraine Mayfield, our casting director, who essentially is like, she's a classic, but she's like a shot of Jack Daniel's No Chaser. She's very Southern, very direct. But these people, it provides you some guardrails to have a certain amount of freedom, because you know that you have engaged with best in class people that help you to bring that vision to fruition. We could not have none of it would be possible without the extraordinary group of people that were surrounding us. But, you know, ultimately, I think we were just incredibly lucky that our story hit when it did, because it's not like we had a lot of money and resources with the film. The budget is less than $10 million. So when we were going after, we were shopping for, you know, Bentleys on a Honda budget. So we were out there like, you know, trying to persuade these brilliant department heads to come onto our project. So we were really lucky that they believed in the script.
And it was really, I mean, the fact that we had all of these folks, like you said, Gary Marcus, Alex Scott, like so many incredible people that we were able to come in, you know, on time and under budget with under 10 million and 27 days.
Yeah, we shot this thing in 27 days.
Wow.
We had not one rain day. We worked, all of us worked like dogs. And we were in the trenches, you know, with the mosquitoes, with the snakes, doing the work and like making it all come together as best we could. But again, kudos to our incredible team. We could not have done it without these extraordinarily gifted artists.
Wow, 27 days, absolutely incredible. And you mentioned earlier casting, and you can't not talk about the casting and Janelle Monáe and her physical performance at times when there was no dialogue was really quite impressive. And talk about, if you would, the directing of her, but also the directing when you're directing dialogue compared to the physical performances. There are some differences, and I think, of course, a great acting talent can make that work either way. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you handle that, and also bringing in the casting that you did.
It was when we thought about Eden as a character and how her speaking and all of the people on the plantation who were enslaved, it was an insult to the slave owners or to the I don't want to give anything away. It was important that you be able to communicate as an artist in a non-verbal way, given what we had to achieve in the first act of that film.
Right.
And so Janelle would have a lot of conversations with Christopher and myself about how Eden would move and how she was able to contemplate what her next move was going to be. There was a rich inner world that had to be indicated just at the surface of her expressions. And, you know, how does the body move when it is in a fight or flight mode, but in captivity? How does the body move when it's been branded? How does the body move when it's doing all that it can psychologically to protect the human body from completely breaking down from trauma? And so those conversations were active and ongoing and centerpiece to the performance. Janelle is someone who is in possession of a quiet power that was so essential for the casting of that role.
Yeah, no, absolutely marvelous, and the supporting cast as well. This is a film that in many ways crosses genres. Talk about some of the influences that maybe you got, or inspirations that you had to pull this film together.
I think one of the main inspirations we had for Antebellum was Gone with the Wind. We felt so strongly about that we, along with our incredible cinematographer, Pedro Lute, obtained the lenses from Gone with the Wind and shot all the plantation scenes using those lenses.
Wow.
I mean, we were determined to use the same weaponry that was utilized to misinform and to create beautiful and very effective propaganda. We were determined to use those lenses to correct the record. And so that was a really big inspiration for us. C and I both love really great films of all categories. I mean, we could go back to Ordinary People, or we could go to Invasion of the Body Snatchers, or Eyes of Laura Mars, or we have a real appreciation for that 70s, early 80s canon. And so we wanted something that felt like, well, what if we made Antebellum in 1978? And you remember, like in the 70s with, the Looking for Mr. Goodbars and those films of that era, that some felt like the American movie-going audience was becoming desensitized to violence. Right. And now what we've gotten is that the American audience has become so trained to a very, oh my God, it's like it's so much of it are like theme park rides. And it is important to Christopher and I that we go back to the power of cinema. Right. And the value that cinema can have in terms of changing hearts and minds and shifting consciousness and having us confront these very difficult issues. We would much rather people be triggered in the safety of their own homes or in a movie theater, rather than us to continue living in an open air shooting gallery because we're not confronting the truth of a thing.
Right, right. In speaking truth and sharing message and sharing theme, I know you had something probably intentional from the script, but after it got to the screen, were there things that came out of that maybe you didn't expect, or thoughts that came out of that you didn't expect, and that maybe others interpreted, and you're like, wow, I didn't even think of that?
It's a good question. I think that for us, in actually seeing the film for ourselves when it was done, like as we were starting to construct it in the dailies, we were looking at it, it was so much more prismatic than we even expected, and that it was like what our idea was twofold. That we wanted to turn the lights on to show all of the beauty and all of the ugliness, and how those two things can live simultaneously in the same space, in the same time. And some of that, as it began to unfold in the movie, and some of what we heard back, I think that the interpretation and how it would take people on a ride where they would think, that's not right. That shouldn't really be there. That's not appropriate for the period. And then it wasn't until they experienced the entirety of the film do they then go back and they have a completely different experience in what they thought they were seeing and what it ended up being.
Fascinating. And the research that I'm sure you had to go into to create not just the story, but you look at the production design and the locations and everything that goes involved in that. Talk a little bit about that research and fulfilling that research on screen as well.
Well, I think it was key that our location was a real plantation, but that it was a plantation that respected the past, and we did a lot of scouting to find the evergreen plantation where we ended up shooting, and Miss Jane, who's the owner, who really respects the past and wants to utilize the plantation to tell the real history. And that was a stark contrast to other locations that we saw that felt more like they were exploiting it. You would go and they would tour the cabins of the enslaved people, and then you would go through a gift shop, and it just felt wrong. And so we wanted to make sure that we were doing everything in the most respectful way possible.
We're also huge history buffs, so we needed to make sure that we had consultants all along the way to make sure that everything that we were putting on screen was vetted and run down and accurate to historical context and fact. We also wanted to incorporate pieces that were really subtle. For instance, Hitler was obsessed with Wagner. And we wanted the score to the film, when you start the movie, when you're first immersed into the antebellum South, that we wanted to tip the hat about neo-Nazis and about the way a collective psychopathy within a society can metastasize so quickly and burn out of control. And
Wow.
so we wanted this sort of operatic sense. We also incorporated the enslaved people, the kidnapped people, whistling the Black national anthem of Lift Every Voice. There are these little things that when you pay attention, you realize, oh, there's something else going on, because the period, it doesn't quite match.
Right.
And then it all comes together.
Yeah. But the beauty of storytelling through any art form is fascinating. And I've always been drawn to film because you can do so much through sight, through sound, through narrative, and a little more. But I want to thank you guys both so much for spending time with us today, Christopher Renz and Gerard Bush. Any final thoughts or comments you want to share about Antebellum before we wrap?
We'd like to say that in what happened most recently at the Capitol, which we found to be deeply disturbing on a whole host of levels, because America, at the end of the day, like this is the only country that has really pulled off the experiment of democracy in any real and meaningful way over an extended length of time. And no, we haven't always gotten it right, but I do think that we have the best potential to reach that point. What we have to decide for ourselves in reference to antebellum, the word antebellum means a period before a civil war, specifically the American Civil War. What we need to decide for ourselves is that the antebellum of the past, or is that the antebellum of the present?
Christopher Renz, Gerard Bush, thank you guys so much for taking time right here on Meet Me at the Movies Open Dialogue to talk with us about Antebellum and about filmmaking. Really appreciate you, and I look forward to what's next, what's in store for the rest of us as well.
All right. Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much. We
much.
appreciate it. Thank you.
For Open Dialogue, I'm Noel T. Manning II. That's a wrap. Thanks, guys.